Hello and welcome to the Echo Chamber podcast. My name is Tony Groves, and today I'm 1/3 of our series of podcasts that's asking the question, is an alternative Ireland possible? Remember folks, the Echo Chamber podcast is a free-flowing conversation that may occasionally touch on mature subjects. As always, I'm joined by my co-host Martin McMahon. Hey Martin.
How you doing, Tony?
More importantly, we're delighted to be joined in the Tour de Shack by Lorcan Sirr. Lorcan, besides being the housing lecturer for DIT, is rumoured to have taken Ken Fox's crown as the most irritating man in Ireland to bureaucracy, Lorcan. Simon Coveney, I believe, left the ministry just purely to get away from you.
I think he denied that in fairness. Yeah. I think it's a great thing. And like Noam Chomsky, just pick up on Rory Hearn. Noam Chomsky said the sign of an educated man isn't the qualifications but a willingness to challenge the orthodoxy. And I always take that as my driving kind of force in life. You know, challenge, question everything.
And you are known for questioning.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important thing to
Tony
do.
rang me there the other day and he said, Sir Lorcan is coming in. I said, we don't do royalty. He said, no, it's Sir Lorcan. I said, that's fine.
Is it, you got an MBE and an OBE?
Yeah, in annoying people. Going to jump straight in. How screwed is the housing market?
Well, it's a really good question. I think for the market to not, I don't even like calling it a market. I just call it the system. The whole system. On say if you take the three fronts of social housing, the rental sector and private house building, it has huge issues in all three areas, massive issues in all three areas that are going to take an awful long time to get right. And the housing system is a finely balanced, kind of almost like a Venn diagram, or a finely balanced kind of set of cogs that if one gets too big or too small, it has a massive impact on the rest of them. So, for example, the lack of private houses to buy means people are going into the rental sector. The lack of social housing means we're also putting people into the rental sector. So that sector expands beyond belief, or you know, we don't actually, it hasn't expanded too much, but you know, rents go up, for example. But we're still at the other two cogs of private house building and social house building are small. So it's a really fine art from a policy perspective to create policy where you have the three cogs working together in harmony, and that's going to take an awful long time to kind of get back, to grease those cogs so that they kind of all work.
Did we have a situation where it did work in the past?
It never works perfectly, and that's part of the game. Is there always one cog that's a little bit kind of needs a little bit more grease and oil, and that's why we've had subsidies and we have grants for various things to kickstart kind of some of the cogs again, whether maybe they're not working as quickly as they should be doing to keep up with things. But you know, this supply and demand thing, for example, is just two ships passing in a night. You know, in the middle of the North Atlantic at 3:10 in the morning, they're in equilibrium and then they're gone again until we get them back. The other thing that you hear a lot about is the market is dysfunctional. Now, I have not a problem with that, but I think the market is operating exactly as you would expect a market to operate. It's responding to whatever's out there, and the result is what we see. So, as my boss Tom Dunn, who's around property for 40 years, says, the free market response to huge demand in the rental sector and no supply is a slum. You know, if you can get away with doing that, that's why would you spend loads of money, you know, doing up your flats and make them really nice, where you're going to get the same or more money by just leaving it as it is. So this is why you need kind of a steady hand in government or at the policy level or an intervention to kind of to make sure that doesn't, like, the role of the state to me is to manage the market as such, and not let it manage the extremes in the market and not let it get too out of hand, you know.
So why are we where we are right now? Why is the market so out of sync at the present moment in time? Yeah,
that's a good question. A lot of it comes back to a lot of at the centre of a lot of the kind of dysfunction that we have, or function, depending on the way you look at it, the way things are working, is there's a couple of things. But one is the fact that we took our eye off the ball with delivering housing for people who need housing, social housing in particular, and that has had a huge knock-on effect then on the private housing side and on the rental side. And we took our eye off the ball back in the early 90s when we changed the model of delivering social housing to rely again, as always, on the market, and then everything went a little bit awry. And that lack of social housing is pretty much at the centre of an awful lot of issues that we have in our housing. It's not the only one. And the other thing is I'm not going to spend my podcast having to go with the officials or the policymakers, but there's a lack of skills and a lack of understanding about how housing systems work amongst policymakers. And ministers, but like ministers are blank sheets, you know, when they go into the department. But very much amongst, I think, policymakers, there's a lack of research capability for a start. There's no research done for an awful lot of the policies that are brought out, and there's a lack of understanding that housing is not like buying and selling second-hand Volkswagen Golfs. You know, housing is a different game, and it doesn't work. That supply-demand thing, like when you increase supply, prices are going to fall. It doesn't work like that in housing, but we have to yet to get that message across.
But we have, you touched on what happened in the 90s where we had private, in effect we stopped building social houses. We said to private developers, you build this and we'll, 30% of it must be social housing.
Yeah, 20, we'll buy it off you.
And again, but what actually happened, as we all know, is they decided, well, we won't put it in this estate. We'll.
They bought their way out of it.
Yeah, they paid out. They paid their way out. A lot of it just actually money went into to the county councils, and they never built anything with it either. And now, when they go back on the actual to claim money off that they were owed off some of the developers were, well, that company's gone wallop, and so we didn't even get paid for some of it.
That was outlawed there a couple of years ago, but we seem to have come across numbers where developers are still buying their way out of their Part 5 obligations to provide. It's now 10% social housing, and we've come across. That was you're not allowed to do that for the last couple of years, but we seem to have come across more situations where there is money changing hands instead of housing.
Oh, it is. I think there was a case recently brought to the attention that in South County Dublin, they were saying the houses were going to be in the range of 575,000. So needless to say, there was a reason for. Not wanting to be 10% social housing in it, I'd imagine, and whatever the quid pro quo there was, but I know that was brought to the attention. So I suppose what we'd love to know though, okay, we spoke briefly to Rory Hearn about this yesterday. You were the guy who brought it to the attention that we weren't building these houses that we were claiming we were building. You were the guy that said, well, plugging in to the ESB is not actually constructing a house.
I wasn't the first guy to say that. The department, the people who count the houses, know that for about 13 years. Yeah. But they just have.
How far off is that figure?
I think every number that the department come out with, that you can divide it somewhere between 2 and 3, and that's the real number. So last year they claimed 15,000 houses were built, and the real number is at the most about 5,000. This year they're going to claim credit for 18,500, 19,000. The real number is probably going to be about 8,000.
And they need to, am I right in this, they need to be hitting 30,000 a year to be
around that, yeah.
To keep up with demand.
Yeah. And what you find now, so I'm sure the listeners are aware at this stage that, we count houses in Ireland by connection to the ESB grid, and there's loads of problems with that. And there are more accurate ways of doing it, but to me, the department don't seem to have any sense of urgency about creating a metric to accurately count houses, because all the housing policy, which is called Rebuilding Ireland, is based on. I was going to ask you about Rebuilding Ireland. Yeah, well, it's all based on dodgy stats. So if you start getting and using real numbers, suddenly the carpet is pulled from under the Rebuilding Ireland. So there's no real sense of urgency about getting down to the.
But isn't that where you have a problem? Like the steps to recovery in any addiction will tell you that you have to admit you have a problem.
Admit you have a problem and quantify the problem and then set targets for solving the problem. What I've seen in the last year or two is the rise of a whole lot of I suppose, spin. I don't like the word say fake news, but like spin and style over substance in a lot of the policy and a lot of the pronouncements that are out there. Yeah. And in fairness to Owen Murphy, when he became minister, he said to me that he was going to stop using the ESB as the metric. Now, so what they've done, they haven't exactly stopped. But now when they say, house building connections, they always have a caveat to say this is measured by ESB connection. So in fairness, but you have to look at the small print yourself. And if you're an average punter, listen to the radio and say we built 18,500 houses. The headline rate would be... Yeah, exactly.
It's like when Leo said we're the biggest housing budget in the history of the state, and you're going, well, yeah, but that's only in context of where we actually are in one of the biggest messes in the history of the state.
And you have to look at that budget. When you break down that budget, it's very interesting. Like it looks like most of that money is going on HAP, supporting people in the private rental sector, rather than there seems to be very little of that money available for actual social house building.
Rory made a great point yesterday. I think it was the line that I was most impressed with, where he said more or less, and he didn't say HAP was, but he alluded to that these payments, that it's corporate welfare. It's welfare to fund, as you say, the other Venn diagram. So if you've got this private market as a rental market as one of the Venn diagram, there's a lot of money flowing in there. He said somewhere in the region of $500 million a year flowing into this.
And it's going to increase in the next few years. That's going to be pushing up more and more towards €1 billion a year. And the last time I looked earlier on this year, it was I think 9 out of 10 housing solutions for people who needed houses, and I put the word solutions in inverted commas because we're on the radio here, but 9 out of 10 of these solutions involve putting people into the private rental sector. So there's a huge transfer of state money, taxpayers' money, to a small cohort of people who are landlords, because, and it doesn't make sense economically. in the long run to do this, because if you're the average HAP payment throughout Ireland is about £8,500 a year. You build houses for 150, 160,000.
I was going to ask you that. You have great experience of other countries and how their systems work there. When you hear normal in relation to the housing crisis here in Ireland and the homelessness crisis, are we normal?
Okay, the homeless stuff and the metrics about homeless, like homelessness is part. Now, there's 2 points about homelessness that we have to clarify. One is the rough sleeping. There's no place that I've ever lived or been in the world where there is some element of rough sleeping. You're always going to have some of that. The interesting thing now is where they're coming from. 10 years ago, or even less than 10 years ago, the biggest cause of rough sleeping and homelessness in that sense was marriage breakup, where typically a man and a husband was a man and a wife would split up. The man typically leaves the house.
That's right, yeah.
Couch surfs with his mates for a couple of weeks or a few months. Events they all get fed up and end up out on the street and doesn't have enough money for deposit for a flat and all that kind of stuff. That's been changed now, where you see the biggest cause is people leaving the private rental sector, becoming homeless. And then we have the other side of homelessness, which is all the families in the hubs and hotels and all that. Now, I don't think that's normal at all. It is very usual to find rough sleeping, and it varies throughout Europe.
Well, 10 years ago, the figure was at our apex in terms of when we were the greatest country in the world. It was 1,522 people.
Yeah,
was
now
kind
it's about 8,500 something.
Yeah,
like that.
and when you have to also factor in, when you say it's now approaching 9,000. You also have to factor in the fact that once we place people in hubs, we remove them from the list.
Yeah, and HAP as well.
Yeah, HAP is they call it leaving homelessness and it's so even the figure of 9,000 taken as a round number is.
Well, the sad thing about the 9,000 is about a third of that is kids. And
yes,
that's
tragic.
That is really poor. Yeah. So the idea of that kind of homelessness is, to me, is kind of unacceptable, to have families not being able to be accommodated or accommodate themselves, and that is not normal, and that's not right. And the measure of us as a society is like, how do we step up and help these people out? And we're not really doing enough, and we're not helping them out enough to do that.
There doesn't seem to be a pathway. If you are a person on, we'll say, on minimum wage, there is no pathway to having a home. There is no set out pathway. You can't work 60 hours a week, get this amount of money, go put your deposit down. It doesn't exist unless your income level has to be somewhere around 80,000 before you even start to qualify.
In the Irish system, housing, you go from your box room in your mum's house, and the steps then that you go to the rental sector and buying your own home, they're big steps to take. In other words, you need a lot of money to get your deposit for your flat, and then even more money to get your deposit for your house. That's the way our system has been operating. In other countries, there are more steps on that stairs, and the steps are easier to jump up from one to the other. And actually, in some systems, you can stay on the middle step. You don't have to own your own home.
Yeah.
Your own home,
but you have security of tenure.
You have security of tenure, and you probably have a measure of rent certainty as well. The Irish system operates under a thing called asset-based welfare, whereby the theory is that you pay low taxes. And a lot of people would disagree with that, but you pay low taxes, but we will help you buy your own home in some way, shape or form. And when you're 66, you'll either be living on a state pension, or your salary will have but you will have no mortgage, because your mortgage will be paid off by the time you're 65 or 66.
Yeah.
And your house is now your welfare. Your asset, that is your house is your asset, and your asset is your welfare. So if you need to get your hip replaced in the Beacon, you can dip into the equity in your house, or you want to send your kids to university or whatever. And that's the way you look. Other countries don't do that. You pay higher taxes, and they have a functioning health system and a functioning transport system and all that.
Yeah, and but like even I remember Bank of Ireland 15 years ago launched a product called Life Loan, where people over 65 could go into the equity in their house and their homes, release it, and for these kind of for basically pension processes. The central bank, I remember, were deeply unhappy with it, because we were then because the Irish mentality was, well, that's the family home. Now the kids who were thinking they'd inherit this one day, they were, are we going to have this war when the parents are deceased? And it really was the fear was a cultural fear that we just couldn't accept that this was something that.
And you raised an interesting point there about the kids, like, because what we do in Ireland, of course, we transfer that wealth on to our kids, right? So you're perpetuating that The haves,
Yeah.
the property haves, are kind of perpetuating that and passing that on, and that's a natural thing to do. Like, why wouldn't you do that? But the people coming up who don't have access to housing are totally lost. They lose out on that because they will never inherit 1/3 of a €600,000 house or whatever it is, split between the kids. They will never get there. So they will never get that kind of step up onto the next ladder. If you don't own your own home in Ireland, you really are at an incredible disadvantage. And increasingly, we're moving towards a kind of a European norm on many metrics. Like, we skipped the whole 20th century in terms of development as in housing and cities and all that kind of stuff, and we're catching up rapidly in the first 17 years of this century. But the people, increasingly, we're going to see about 1/3 of people not owning their own homes. We're going to see 1/3 of households being 1 or 2 people. So smaller households, and a lot of people not owning their own homes. And we need to kind of prepare for that. But it means that those people, if you don't own your own home, you're not going to get the benefit of that asset. And you'll end up in the rental sector. You do not want to be renting in the rental sector definitely after the age of 60 or 65, because A, you've no security of tenure, and B, once your pension kicks in, if you're on a state pension of €238 a week or whatever it is,
forget about it.
That's all your rent, essentially. So what are you going to live on? And again, you don't have even if you're on a public sector pension, it's still going to take up a huge chunk of your salary, and you have no security of tenure.
You were saying that these problems, it's a long term to fix these problems. Even if we started now, it's long term. We'll just say, for instance, the situation that exists with, we're heading towards 10,000 people homeless. So we're going to pass that mark fairly shortly. If you were handed the reins of power tomorrow, what would you do to alleviate those situations ASAP, as fast as you could?
I think the first thing to do, and it's like Tony said a few minutes ago, is we need to start again with addressing, with finding out where we are in terms of what the issues are and what the accurate data is, because only when you know how many people are rough sleeping, how many people are homeless, how many people in social housing, how many people need a house to buy, how many people need a house to rent, only when you get all the metrics right can you start to make solutions. And at the moment we're working off false metrics. We're working off, we're deluding ourselves with some of the numbers that we're putting out there. And so you're never going to get an accurate solution to these things if you're if your starting point is inaccurate, if your starting point is wrong. If the foundations of the house are wrong, the house is going to be wrong, essentially.
Yeah.
So my first point would be to sit down for 5 days and just work out exactly where we are and go from there.
And could you, if you had access to all the information, you could do that in 5 days?
Well, you could, of course. You could do it very quickly if you were of a mind to do it. And the second thing then that I would do is, increasingly I see, like, from looking at the demographics and looking at just the changing nature of work and the way the world is going, is that there's going to be an increasing gap between the people who own their homes and people who don't, for example, and we need some sort of a segment in the market in between social housing and home ownership, which brings affordability into it.
You're talking the guards, the nurses,
I'm talking everybody, anybody on an income between 36 and 85,000, a household income of that. That's a big sum of money. 85,000 is way over what most people earn. But even people on 80,000 living in Dublin or Cork or big cities, it's hard to find proper accommodation. So we need, and in that affordable segment, there's 2 types. One is affordable rental, and the other is affordable housing to buy. And I think we need to get our heads together and do that. And the reason it's not happening at the moment, there will be an affordable housing scheme, I think, coming out after Christmas. I suspect it won't be an affordable housing scheme. It'll be a discounted house price scheme. In other words, the house price, the average market price in where we're sitting here in Dublin 9, are we sitting in Dublin 7 or Dublin 9?
Dublin 9.
Yeah, and you just take off 10% of that, and that's suddenly an affordable house. That's just a discounted house.
Yeah, that's
it. It's not affordable housing.
Yeah.
But what you need as affordable housing is the affordability is worked on people's incomes, not on the average market price of the house. And so that's not going to solve our problem. But in that segment, we need to deliver affordability.
If you take that the median wages or the median income is somewhere in around the 27,000, that means...
It's more than that. It's going to be more than that. It's still nowhere near...
That would be the median, though.
Okay.
That's not the average. The average is a little higher. That means that your affordable house has to be somewhere in the 130 to 160 range.
That could be done. You look at O'Coulon and Hugh Brennan in Ballymun delivering houses for €1,500 a square metre. It can easily be. It can be done. Now he got the land for €1,000 an acre, no development levies. But he is acting like the state should be acting.
Yes.
But he's a housing co. Now the problem is this, right? It costs money to do these schemes, right? It costs the state money. If you are restricted by borrowing limits, as we have signed up to do, in terms of our bailout, there's only a certain pot of money, right?
Debt to
So
GDP
Leo Varadkar has
ratio.
to make, Leo has to make choices. So we either don't build hospitals A, B, and C, or we don't do this and we do housing, or we do or we do the hospitals and we don't do housing. Whatever it is, there are choices to be made there, and because all these things will go on the government's balance sheet, and this is what they're trying to desperately avoid, is get any sort of expenditure on the balance sheet, because that will involve probably raising taxes.
You raise an interesting point there, Lorcan, but we talk about the choices we have to make, whether we're going to build houses, and yet we have a commitment, not just for this year and next year, but actually a 5-year plan to reduce taxes. So if we're going to reduce taxes, and we're not going to, and we're obsessed with the debt to GDP ratio rules in the EU, which I always tell the story of how Spain did. Spain broke those rules.
Spain blew them off.
And just said to the EU, we ain't paying no fine, baby. We're going to be the best boys in school. We have to accept that. So, but if we're going to make those choices and cut taxes, and then we have to balance the books, how are we going to build houses?
Well, this is it. I mean, these are the political choices that political parties make and leaders make to appeal to their people that they think are going to vote for them. And of course, for Leo Varadkar and Fine Gael, a lot of middle class people would vote for Fine Gael. They don't want the idea of their taxes going up. They think they're paying enough taxes already. And arguably we do pay an awful lot of taxes. And it's not just the direct tax; it's the indirect stuff that gets to me rather than the direct income tax out of my salary every month. So these are choices that we have to make. Are we going to build houses for people, or are we going to incentivise the market to do it? And so far we've chosen to incentivise or to encourage the market to deliver housing in terms of rental, social housing, and private house building, and it's not stepped up for their own reasons. The market hasn't responded. So now we're in a bit of a bind where we're relying on a market, and of course when you're relying on a market, you can't force them to do anything. They will act as and when it suits them to maximise their profits, and we're relying on them, and they haven't stepped up for their own reasons. So we're now in a bind.
It's a rent-seeking market. We know this. There's land hoarding. There's lobbyists, groups. There's the construction industry federation. There's as you said. Why would you? The market is behaving as it should. It's actually making.
As it would.
Yes, as it would. But it's gouging out more profit out of a shallow. It's instead of
maximising its opportunities at every turn. I mean, that's what they do. And of course, land and building, the lobbyists are very, very powerful and have the ear of a lot of.
I was just going to bring this up when you say we decide or we, and for me, I've never decided that cutting taxes is a better priority than building houses. How are we ever going to get this? Do you see housing as ever becoming an election issue?
Yeah, very much so. I think the next election or the one after, I think it's going to be the driving issue, possibly the next election, because not now. It's not just affecting people on lower incomes, and you can kind of over the years political parties could kind of ignore that because they were a minority and there's only 1,000 homes families. And they didn't vote. Yeah, and renters particularly never voted. Were very poor voters because you had separated fathers, immigrants and students, and they were all very poor voters. Now you're looking at 20, 25, depending where you go in the country, the average is about 20%, but in Galway it's like 40% households renting, and they're not your separated father, your student, your immigrant, they're all that, plus your doctor, your lawyer, your lecturer, your accountant, your whatever, right? They're all in
young
it there.
professionals.
So they're all a lot of the voting tendency of the renters is going to increase massively, and then you have housing affecting not just people in lower incomes, but middle class people now as well. Because the kids can't afford a housing, they can't afford rent, they're moving back in with Ma and Da. Ma and Da are losing the run of themselves because they can't stand having the kids back in. I was out last night with a guy whose kids are living at home, and he says, like, there should be tax relief for this kind of what he has to do, And this is happening. So now it's affecting people who do vote for your Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, right? It's hitting them literally at home. And so the problem has now been spread a lot broader. And I think the reality is hitting. You could ignore housing problems before because we'll all get a house, right? Now that isn't the case. So it's very hard now for your political parties to ignore housing as an issue. I spoke last month, or was it the month before, at the Fianna Fáil Ardèche. I'm not a political member of any political party. I was just asked to speak about housing. And I made the point to them that you need to offer something to people in terms of housing. And what are you going to offer people who are renting? What are you going to offer people who want to buy their own home, and what are you going to offer people who already have a home but it's maybe poor quality? Because don't forget, we have a huge legacy issue of really, really bad house building around the country that hasn't gone away. It's still there.
Higher right on this subject.
Like at Carrickmans Greens and not Carrickmans Green and all those kind of places. Yeah, mould, pyrite,
Yeah.
all that. I mean, the pyrite is getting resolved, but there's other stuff getting resolved at taxpayers' expense.
Yes.
Let's not forget that.
Not home bond.
No, well, I'm not going to go there, but yeah. So, but what you have there, what you have there with all that is that I was saying to them, like, that, you know, if you want to, like, how you have to offer something in terms of housing, and not just a grant to buy a house, because it's not just having the grant. I might get the grant, okay, but if I'm on contract work and I work up to the bank and I've got, you know, a master's degree and I earn good money during the year, whatever, right? They're not going to give me a mortgage because I'm on contract, even though I'm a very highly paid, clever contract worker. So it doesn't matter what grant you offer me, I won't be able to buy my house. And this is comes back to my point that I try and make, is that the world has changed now from 10 years ago. And there's a whole rise of different types of working practices, which impacts on your mortgage. Accessing finance for builders is different. We now have credit limits that we never had before for people who want to borrow. And we have a rental market that's going to become a permanent home for a much larger proportion of the population. And I don't think the penny has dropped in the Custom House that we're in a totally new world here than we were 10 or 15 years ago. And the game has changed. And we're still playing Monopoly with old rules. And actually, you know, there's a whole new Monopoly set out there.
Not only are we playing Monopoly with old rules, as Brian Hayes came out to this week, we have old people playing old Monopoly with old rules going forward forevermore in the civil service.
There is now. I don't really have to go to town civil service because 99% of the civil service is all good and grand, and I've actually had some of them on my courses over the years, and they've all been excellent. There's just a small cohort of policy making that goes on that's inappropriate, that's very political, it's very ideological. This is from civil servants, and it's deliberately based on inaccurate figures. And unless we get that right, we're going nowhere.
There was a great apologies again to anybody who had to put up the poor audio of my Konstantin Gordiev interview, but there was a great point he actually made around the election question. He said that basically the first guy who stands up and he says, say Leo Varadkar stood up and said, okay, our housing crisis is bad, but here is a route map of steps that we're going to say to a mother that you will have a front door and you'll be able to bring your child to school. If the first leader who cracked that nut in terms of just saying, look, I can't deliver it for you today, but this is what we're going to do, and the first person who did that would actually, you know, could win in a landslide, because it's and they're not really doing that. They're actually giving us a plan. I think at one stage this year that there had been more between forums,
more conferences than houses built.
Well, Owen Murphy actually made more announcements.
Yeah, he made 66 announcements, which was more than the number of houses that was delivered.
That was your stat, wasn't it? Yeah, I remember.
Well, it actually came from Owen O'Brien. But I counted the houses and Owen counted the announcements.
The papers.
What's going on at the moment is policy is designed, as far as I can see, to tread water long enough for them until the market responds. And that's simply not good enough.
Or is it to tread water long enough so it's somebody else's problem?
Yeah, I mean, if you were strategic with this, I mean, the next election might be the one to lose, like, because
completely.
Housing is now becoming like health, you know.
And I think the internals in Fine Gael, despite what the external polls are telling them, the internal polls are telling them differently. It's not.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Like, I'm not a political person, so I'm not kind of party to their stuff. But you kind of feel for. I think that people will hate me for saying this, but like for Owen Murphy and Simon Coveney and that, like, they're going in there, and it's just like, to me, it's the equivalent of a war zone. Like, nothing you do seems to kind of solve the problem.
Health was the place not to be for years and years. And now housing is the place nobody wants to touch.
Like that.
I mean Simon Coveney sailed out of that so fast.
I think the penny will drop in due course that the Custom House there is the centre of an awful lot of socio-economic dysfunction in this country, and has been for a long time. And, you know, there's a kind of a reappraisal of who's advising, and because they have a lack of research capability, and I'm not just saying that as my opinion, I have an internal report from the Department of Environment assessing their own research capabilities, and it was damning, and that's an internal one. And because if you can't do your own research, you're kind of relying on outside people to answer your questions. And of course, when you look at the FOIs, like I do, about who they're talking to, you see the same 10 names coming up over and over.
Well, I mean, the two big, it's something I harp on again and again, two biggest lobbyists, IBEC and the Construction Federation.
The IFA.
Yeah.
And they're incredibly powerful. I think the IFA is number one, and I think
IBEC's number one, Construction Federation Industries number two, and
and when you look at the FOIs of who they talk about various things, you see the same groups, bodies, organisations.
it's the same bodies, and these are the same bodies then that are given abilities to write op-eds in our national newspapers as well. Like they're asked to they sit if there's a panel show on. There's usually a representative there, and there's an agreed talking point, and so
the problem is that it's like the lobbyists do what lobbyists do, and that's fine. Yeah, well,
absolutely,
that's grand. We all pitch in and try and get our influence on some things. The problem is when they go unchallenged, and that's a bit of an issue. Now, and I have a feeling, right? So the last couple of years, like the likes of myself and Mel Reynolds and Orla Hegarty and whatever, been kind of causing a little bit of and Deirdre, like stirring it up a little bit, and just challenging things. I have a feeling that industry, and from the policy perspective in the civil service and the industry itself, have pretty much never been challenged. And they've done their own thing for decades and decades, and nobody's ever stood up to them and say, "Oh, hang on a second, I don't believe that number. Can you prove it?" And of course, they can't prove the number because the number,
an example of that's just very recently come up was with construction and shortage of people,
labour,
and this has come up very. There was no shortage until...
I was on the radio programme with senior lobbyist, shall we say, a couple of times, and so was Mel Reynolds, and there was absolutely... He told me I didn't know what I was talking about. There was no such thing as a labour shortage. And then this morning on the radio, there's similar lobbyists out saying, there's an acute labour shortage. And nobody picks them up and say, well, hang on a second, a couple of months ago you were saying there wasn't a problem. Of course there's a labour shortage. You talk to anybody out there. Michael O'Flynn, who's a big developer from Cork, I was at a conference with him recently on the platform, and he said, he just got out and said, there is a labour shortage. And of course the problem there is, where do you get the labour from? Where are they going to live? And this is the kind of conundrum about housing, particularly house building. If you ramp up activity too quickly, things get expensive, and quality suffers. Okay, and a lot of the cohort of people that we had that would be really skilled house builders, like tradesmen and managers and that, have gone.
Yeah.
So we're left with two people. One is the guys near the end of their career who know a lot, but it's not a mass. And then there's all the young bucks out there who don't know a whole lot. They don't have that 10 years experience about how to do things. And so quality is going to be an issue going forward. We still have no decent consumer protection if you buy a house.
That's a huge
and that is a
concern.
massive issue. And there's a lady, a barrister called Deirdre Lyne, who has written some really interesting stuff about consumer protection. And I have an academic paper of hers coming out in a journal in the new year. And it's really fascinating about consumer protection in Ireland and the lack of it for house builders. And we've let this happen ourselves. But the main point I think is that over the last decades, these people who make policy and the lobbyists have been given free rein to do what they want. And now that there are increasingly numbers of people who are not just me, but like with Davies and Goodbody coming out and also, backing up Mel and myself's numbers and saying that, we're actually right. And when you get the establishment guys like Davy and Goodbody's coming out and saying that, there must be something going on there,
Do you think if they knew the real figures, if they sat down and worked out the real figures...
But they know the real figures.
That there would be just... If they were publicly released, that there would just be shock.
I think a lot of the numbers are out there now because Mel Reynolds is brilliant at taking incomprehensible PDFs and all the information that's put out there is put out there in a really convoluted way to designed not to help you find the answers. But Mel sits down and goes through the numbers, and we know, for example, the way the numbers are presented is your average person looking at that would go, I haven't a clue what's going on there, but it looks like there's 12,000 social houses in the pipeline. Actually, there's not. And so, in quarter 3 this year, local authorities built just 168 houses. And there should be building thousands of houses.
160. I mean, that really is dropping the ocean.
This year, so far, I don't have the notes in front of me, but I think there's about 15 local authorities that have built no houses in the country. Up until the first 6 months, there was about 21 local authorities that built no houses, and in the first 9 months, I think it's down to about 15 of them have built 0 houses, including ones around Dublin. So we the numbers are out there, but when you put them all together, it paints a really, really poor picture. But the numbers are always presented in a very convoluted way.
Yeah, and it goes to that point. If I put up an article, even in my own stuff, and it immediately gets attacked by a certain demographic of voter that says no, this is not, and they produce a link from the Department of Housing, and then Mel maybe comes to my rescue on social media, which he but he does, and he comes up, and then this I've actually seen where, and then all of a sudden an image is pasted into an article, and it goes quiet in Trollville,
But the interesting thing now, they've moved off. I've noticed the numbers coming out, and they've moved away from talking about house building numbers because they know they're just wrong, and everybody knows they're wrong at this stage, And they moved on to using other metrics such as planning permissions and commencement notices. it's totally disingenuous to put out that information there, because commencement notices and planning permissions cannot be used as a measure of current activity or to predict future activity. And that's not me saying that. That's CIS who manage all these things. That's the official line. You cannot use these, and yet they're doing this because your average punter in Tipperary hearing, planning permissions are up 37%, thinks it's wonderful, and of course it's not. It's a nonsense.
There's another one on that, Martin, which is really great that no one picks up on either. Is they turn around and they say they go into the banks, the central bank releases its report and says mortgage approvals are up by 40% or up by 42%. But what they're not actually saying is that what that actually means in effect, you maybe have 6 punters for one property.
When
so
you start from a low base, one or two big developments, for example, say, there's a 50% uptake in commencement notices. Yeah, that's because you've got 2 new developments of 100 units each, and that doubles. Like 3 is kind of 50% bigger than 2. You know what I mean?
And if you notice, when they are quoting figures, they are going back to the worst periods. They are going back to the 2010s, the 2011s. They're not going back to the 2006s, the 2005s.
So far, I found they haven't produced one metric yet that you can't rip apart and say that's wrong.
You're full of enthusiasm, Lorcan.
I'm Dr. Doom. When I go to these conferences, I am Dr. Doom. Do
you see any chink of light there at all?
That's a really good question. I don't know. I think the chink of light is the more that you highlight these things and the more you bring it to the public attention.
Yeah, then eventually.
That's the only. Like, I have no influence or power at all, or these, and Mel doesn't either, and Deirdre doesn't, and Orla doesn't. Not really. We don't. Our only kind of way of getting things changed is bringing it to the public attention. And in fairness to Owen Murphy, like, I met him when he became minister, and I said, I'm not standing over your dodgy stats, like, and he said, I'll change the ESB thing, and he did. So it's a small change, but now his guys have found other ways of producing equally disingenuous numbers again.
But I mean, isn't it awful that there's this arms race, that there's guys trying to find out what the real figures are, and then on the other side of the coin, there's guys trying to hide the real figures, when that energy could all be put into improving.
Trying doing FOIs and looking for the numbers, or asking parliamentary questions, and you just get stonewalled essentially with disingenuous replies. We don't have access to them.
We know it's actually become marketing. Politics is marketing a lot now, and that's.
I'm surprised at how ideological the Department of Housing is. I get that sense that they're quite political.
Yeah.
And rather than being civil servants, they're quite very political civil servants. Anyway, it's not fair to always have a go at them, but I do get frustrated with the spin that comes out, and I think that's just frustration.
We are. I think we have. Oh God, I hope this is the pinnacle of spin that we're reaching now at the moment.
Oh, I'd say we've a long way to go yet.
but it's when maybe it's just my perception, but the spin has become counterproductive now. That the spin itself is the news rather than what they're trying to spin.
Yeah.
And I think when you get to that point, you're not getting your message across.
I don't know, Martin, because that's not borne out by 36% of the people vote will seem to be satisfied with how things are going.
I remember there was polls like
that. You'd wonder who, you'd like to break down that poll and see where all
I agree. A poll is just a poll, and it's a moment.
People are fickle as well, and people are innocent as well, and believe kind of stuff, and rightly so. Like, you don't want a nation of cynics like me, but people, when they hear the news that commencement notices are up 48%, whatever it is, and they believe that, and like, why wouldn't they? Because you have a right to expect that there's accurate information being put out there. So people are kind of nicely naive in a way, and kind of this is what you have to work with, though.
Yeah. I suppose if we were going to say from a hopeful point of view, we had Rory here yesterday. Rory's a very passionate guy.
He's a great guy, yeah.
We know they're all involved in the Home for All movement. We know that homelessness is not normal. There's, again, guys, if you're around Tuesday outside Leinster House, there's going to be a bit of a gig, some poetry, and a very hipster centric. Martin will promise to wear all sorts of beanies.
Big collection of hats.
Big collection.
You're Russian when they come in.
But like, it goes back to that. It does go back to what you said, Lorcan. It's about actually getting that message out there. So on a public, what simply comes across is that we have to be able to say, well, no, those figures aren't accurate. So we're not actually facing up to the reality of the situation. It's also about going to getting people active, and so in terms of saying, yeah, no, actually, I'm not happy when Damien English comes out and says something like, don't you're talking down the country. The Bertie Ahern cribbing and moaning, it always comes back to
the green jersey thing, right?
Yeah,
is the last sign of desperation.
Yes,
and I know where that line comes from. And when I heard him using that, I thought that you're really desperate if that's what you're doing. Like,
Tell us where that line comes
the line
from.
about like we shouldn't be talking down housing because we got to think about Ireland's competitiveness and basically put on the green jersey kind of stuff. Housing is going to affect our economic competitiveness massively, and I think when that does happen, the penny will drop and things will change because
I mean, so when the people Owen Murphy tells us not to talk to because they don't talk about homelessness because the MNCs might be listening, they're the ones that'll actually force the change in the end.
I think so. Yeah, the market will change itself because when these guys want to come in here and they're looking where they're going to house their staff, and you see what people forget about renting. Okay, these guys will be well paid coming in, most of them. But one of the biggest demands for one of the biggest causes of wage demands and higher wages is rent. So when your rent goes up, you go to your boss and you look for more money.
Yeah.
And of course, they don't want that either. That makes them less competitiveness. So I think ultimately what will force change will be probably FDI companies or companies that are already here will go into the government and say, guys, get a grip on this because you're costing us money and you're going to cost the country jobs. But so I was very disappointed to hear Damon Lynch come out with that because I think that's just that's desperation, But I was at a thing a couple of weeks ago where he was speaking and it was very interesting because he went on essentially waffling. He's a great waffler in fairness, but he went on and
you use waffle. That's your word.
Yeah, and he is. But even the photographers who were there were going, "God, that guy waffles." Like the photographers were saying it, and it was kind of funny, but. What he said was, I don't want to get into the statistics. And my boss was sitting beside me and he turned around and he smiled and he said, I think you got him on that one.
Yeah.
Well, we had Paddy in here not so long ago, and Paddy was getting me to do impressions of
Damien,
and it was where are you going to get the money from? Where are you going to get the money from?
Where are you going to get the money for that?
He's got his own unique way of delivery.
Yeah, so in a nutshell, really, what we're looking at is an entire change of mentality needs to happen.
Yeah, how would you put this? Yeah, I think the only, out of all this, right, the message that I would say to people who are accommodating policymakers, politicians, activists, NGOs, the world has changed. Renting is in a different space now, and it's going to be a permanent feature of life forever. Finance for builders and for ordinary people is going to be an issue. Changing nature of work, where and how we live is going to be a huge issue as well. The idea of commuting and sustainable living and energy efficiency. The world has changed from 10 years ago, and unless we get our heads around that, our kids are never going to have their own homes either. And that's going to be a bit of an issue. So when you get your head around the fact that the game is different, then you make solutions that support that game. Right now, what we're doing is providing solutions for a system that's kind of now
20 years old.
Yeah, it's now past its prime. It's gone. And the problem is we have, particularly in house building as well, it's a very traditional, old-fashioned, not innovative industry. So we're still building 3-bed semi-Ds.
It's all very standard.
The game has changed totally, and unless we get our heads around that, we're going to be sitting here in 10 years' time talking about the same thing.
This is wonderfully uplifting.
Are you doing anything for the Christmas, Lorcan?
I'm going to light the fire about 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm going to open a bottle of Marks and Spencer's finest sherry. And I'm going to get my line of pork from the butcher, and that's Christmas Day. And then Stephen's Day I normally go shooting, so we'll do that on Stephen's Day.
And who do you shoot?
They line up politicians and people I don't like. There you go.
It's a long list and you just made the cut, Mark.
That'll be Stephen's Day, and then back in the game then after that.
Right, guys. I think we'll wrap it up now.
Yeah, thanks very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Sir Lorcan. It has been very nice
Sir
to meet
Lorcan.
Another reminder, folks, that if you can get along to Home for All event on Tuesday, do. Martin is debuting his new song. It's all one big conspiracy. It's Lorcan, are you going to code?
It would be number one, but they keep knocking it down the charts. The Illuminati.
I want to thank you all for listening and remind you that you can subscribe to us on iTunes, SoundCloud, or wherever you get your podcast from. Please take a minute and leave us a review, and don't forget to tell your friends. You can send us an email to theechochamberpod@gmail.com or follow us on Twitter @echochamberspod. Thanks again, folks.